So I want to start by asking you, I was just talking to the great Sarah Finn, casting director, a couple weeks ago, and she was remembering your audition from, over a decade ago, and how, you auditioned for Steve. But the thing she likes to say about that is that, but then we saw this darkness in him and decided that he should be Bucky. So I'm wondering if you can, what you, if anything, you remember about that process.
It was a wild time because I'd made like 3 different audition tapes. I was shooting this tiny movie in Germany, and I was making tapes, sending them from there. And I made a tape for Steve, all for Steve. And they didn't say no, they kept giving me notes, so I was redoing them. And then I didn't hear anything for a while. And I was going to actually go to Romania, where I'm from, after Germany. And instead, like, this is where I'm like, I don't know if, life could have gone a very different way if I'd gone. I don't know. But instead, I actually ended up coming back to LA. And then I heard that they were like, oh, you're in LA. So then I finally went in for like a 4th audition, in Sarah's office. Mm-hmm. And I did the audition there with her. And then they called me to do a screen test, which was for Steve. And I was like, a screen test? I did one other screen test in my life, which was for Star Trek with J.J. Abrams. And it was like and I obviously did not get that, but like, but it was like it was like in an office with a regular office. I mean, this apparently we were actually going to shoot like a scene. You shoot like a whole scene. You put on costume and everything. I put on this 1940s, like whatever that suit that Chris has in the movie, in the first Captain America movie. And like, you have hair and makeup done. Like, it's like a big tease, but you still don't have the job,
Right.
It's crazy. And then you go in there and you're like, oh my God, lighting and the camera. And I remember doing that. And it was me and like a bunch of other people. And as soon as I got out of that, like 4 days later, they were like, it's not going to go any further. You always hear that. It's not going any further. And then, so I was kind of like, fuck, after all that, I was really bummed. And then I got a call saying, but maybe maybe we can talk about this character. And I never even knew anything about James Bucky Barnes. Because what I did, like, even I never knew anything about Captain America. I never knew anything about, I never read the comics. So I didn't want to read any of it before the audition anyway. There was no script. There was just like the scene. And so I really didn't know anything about Bucky Barnes.
It's interesting that Sarah said that thing about, the darkness in you, whatever she means by that. But when did you know that you weren't just going to be playing James Bucky Barnes, that you were definitely going to be playing the Winter Soldier?
Well, so we had that meeting, right? Like, where they were like telling me about James Bucky Barnes. Again, I don't have the job. Like, I'm like listening to them going, are they like, sounds fantastic, but like, what, like, are they just saying if I'm interested? I mean, yeah, I am interested. Like, I want to be in a movie, but they were telling me about his story, and they said, yeah. And then, he becomes the Winter Soldier. He ends up sort of being captured, and he falls off this train. He loses an arm, gets captured. Then they brainwash him. They turn him into this assassin, and he comes back, and, eventually, he comes back around. He gets his memories. Like, they told me the whole story, but that was it. There was no more. And then we were shooting the first movie, and I fall off the train in the movie. And I realized when I went in for a costume fitting, they had given me a costume that was missing the left arm. So I was like, oh, okay, that means that they're gonna do it, like. And then suddenly we were gonna shoot the scene, and I had the costume that had both arms, and I was like, why is not the arm? And they're like, oh, you know what? They just decided that they'll see. If anything, they'd rather have both arms just in case and stuff. And I was like, fuck, maybe they're not going to do it.
Right.
So then I fell off the train in the movie, and the movie comes out. Everything's, cool. 2011. I'm at the premiere of Captain America, the first Avengers. And meanwhile, like, I'm not, I'm still like really fighting for a job. Like 2011 was one of the hardest years of my life. Like, I was going to this premiere, but I like really need, like, it was I needed a job. I was running out of money. Like, it was like all this stuff was happening. And then it really wasn't until, I want to say, like, whenever the San Diego, the Comic-Con in San Diego happened, a friend of mine called me and said, dude, they just let out the new title for the sequel, and it says Captain America: The Winter Soldier in it. And I was like, no way.
That's how you found out?
That's how I sort of found out. And then a call happened and we were like, okay, we're going to do the sequel. That's how that happened. I mean, I never knew.
That's wild. I'm interested because you said something in an interview sort of before this season dropped about this idea of playing a character for 10, 11 years, and this idea of meeting this character at various stages in your own life, like who you are now meeting Bucky Barnes versus who you were then meeting Bucky Barnes. And I just think it's really interesting that when you first met him, you're circling one of the worst years of your life, like it's coming. And I'm curious, when you're meeting Bucky now, what's different about you, or what's different about your approach as you connect with that character now?
Well, I mean, I think the only thing what's different is the level of experience, right? Like, I feel I've grown so much obviously as a human, from experience, but also as an actor. Like, how I'm approaching things now is just on such a deeper, more specific level than I did 10 years ago. I mean, like, I'd gone to school and I knew what I was doing, and but then, like, I think you just learn yourself better. You learn how to access yourself in different ways. So I feel, for me, the work is always deeper now. Like, so I guess that sort of changes approaching the character, but also the character had evolved, because he'd sort of gone through that whole Winter Soldier journey. And then we kind of had him, on these redemption paths, like all through Captain America Civil War and into the Infinity War Endgame stuff. But it was really, for me, like the Winter Soldier movie and the Civil War movie were probably the biggest character development moments that he had, right? Because he didn't really, in the Endgame Infinity War, he was there and it was still traveling towards something. And really, the show now, like, this show was the first time we kind of really dove into more things with him deeply. And yeah, I just think it's just a life experience that you kind of come back to a character, and in a way, you add to it. Like, I don't know what filming, I mean, it's not like A Boy's Life, right? That movie that Ethan Hawke did.
Yeah.
But they came back through the years, and there was a maturity there and a growth. And I can't help but think that, to some extent, if I sat down and I watched Captain America: First Avenger and I watched all the movies that this character is in, including our show, I 100% would probably see a character that's grown, because the actor is playing him as,
Well, I'm curious, for this show specifically, when they talked to you about doing it, what arc did they sort of track out for Bucky? Where do you feel like it was important for Bucky to land at the end of this series?
I think we all discussed that we wanted to find a way back for him towards a more stable place, or a better sense of self. He's got to own everything he's experienced. He's got to kind of, like, the Winter Soldier persona per se it's like a demon that's a part of him that he's somehow come to terms with, and he's learned how to turn into a strength, rather than it, suddenly, like, he's just going to be cured of this thing. Because
right.
They are comic book heroes, but, like, and some more than others, but they all have these emotional complexities to them. And one of the things that I love, like, I was lucky with this character, is that he really does have this sort of relatable arc. We've all kind of go through, we all have to, like, face our pasts. We're all haunted by things that have happened to us, trauma, things that we're trying to, like, overcome, or, you know, people deal with addictions, people deal with, you know, so there's all these pieces to that character, kind of as he's like trying to find a better way of life, you know, and fit into the world better. And also give him a new life, so to speak, without, you know, in the shadow of Steve Rogers.
Right.
You know, and exploring how that character now can be in the world, you know, and probably function even for audiences, you know, without Steve Rogers. I think for both of them, that was also another piece.
Yeah. It's interesting because talking to Malcolm and talking to Kari, they both said that, and you've said this as well, that basically your junket press tour dynamic with Anthony was a big inspiration for the dynamic that they wanted to capture in the show, right?
I bet.
But I'm curious for you, how challenging is that, you know, that they encourage some improv on set and stuff like that, but how challenging is that for you? Because I see plenty of Anthony Mackie and Sam Wilson, but you and Bucky are further apart, I think, personality-wise. So how hard is it for you to sort of bring your natural personality into this other character that you've been playing?
Well, but again, like for me, like I knew this character really well. Like I feel like the preparation that before you start shooting is the most crucial time ever, because, and as you know, like with what I'm currently dealing, like it's just like, or you can see, others can't yet. It's insane to try to become someone else or what. Like you're always trying to find ways to relate. You're always trying to understand it. The whole thing is a big sort of study project. With this character, I mean, I was very protective, you know, while we were shooting. And there were things that we were trying out that had been tried out on the page that weren't working, you know, and things that needed to be reshaped, you know, with us now being kind of like getting into the dialogue, getting there on set, you know, dynamics. And it was great that we were allotted the freedom, Anthony and I, to really take what was on the page and make it our own, you know, and kind of bring our own experience from the movies to this, you know. And there are times where I was like, hey, listen, like he wouldn't do that, or he wouldn't say that here, or he'd do this, or we haven't earned this yet. You know, I think, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, I wanted to really explore a different side of him. Obviously one that was comedic with Anthony, right? The dynamic of what that is. And it really, I started looking at it and going like, oh my God, they're like it's the odd couple. That's what it is. Like Anthony's, you know, Walter Matthau and I'm Jack Lemmon. Like or it's like the other way around. Like that's the bickering thing. That's the comedy, you know. Mm-hmm. And Bucky is a guy out of time who's like an old guy trapped in his body trying to fucking figure out what the hell's going on. And that's the comedy, like that's where, and that's also where the truth is with him, you know. But I was like always reminding them, being like, guys, just remember, he was a fucking assassin. He can't, you know, he's always going to have this chip on his shoulder, you know, to some extent. And, you know, and also he's really he's at the beginning of the season, he's coming from a very defensive place because his sort of big purpose up until that point, right? Like had been, I know I'm not a perfect individual, right? But I know this guy, my best friend, the guy who's been by my side since I fucking remember anything, Steve Rogers, is a good man. And I'm going to do everything I can to try to make sure that guy's okay, you know, and follow his lead. And I know like that was like the moral compass. Steve Rogers was his moral compass, right? And now you've taken that out. So he's going kind of, it is a little bit of like, well, now what do I compare? Like, what do I base myself off of? Like, what's my target? What's my purpose? What's my direction? What's my sense of, where's my GPS? You know, like it's a little bit like that. And he's in a very defensive place at the beginning because he hasn't confronted the emotional implications of that yet. And throughout the season, obviously he does. but you see that he sort of like, instead of confronting, he's kind of punting certain questions and fears like further down the road and kind of trying to drive an agenda and for a minute, before he actually takes a step back and goes, wait a minute, what does Sam Wilson really want? Like who is Sam? And therefore who am I? And like, what do we really want? And what is it really about? And so I guess those are all the things we're tackling.
Well, I do have a question about that because the lack of Steve, like Steve's absence is sort of looming over this, right? Because he's an absence for Sam and he's an absence for Bucky. And I'm curious, the show seems to want to keep it very open where Steve is. Is he alive? Is he on the moon? Is he, whatever? But for your understanding of how you're playing Bucky, in what way is Steve gone for Bucky? Does he like have no access to him anymore?
I always thought there was a conversation that took place, before that scene, that the final scene of Avengers Endgame, where you see Steve Rogers much older, and there's a sort of rites of passage, that happens. That I always thought there was a conversation between him and Bucky before that happened.
Yeah.
And in that conversation where it was Bucky, you don't have to worry anymore. I found my peace, I finally got that life I wanted, I'm taking one for me, and I'm good. Now it's your turn to go and take one for you.
Yeah.
We've both served this thing, this shield, this ideal, this whatever you want to call it. We've done our time. Like, let's find our life before, while we still have it, and I think Bucky kind of honored that. And I think essentially it was goodbye. It was like, okay, buddy, it was a good run. Like, good luck and let's go and see what happens, And so I don't think does Bucky know where Steve Rogers is? That's a good question. Maybe not, I don't even know if I have the answer to that question. And I definitely don't. Yeah. So I treated the season very much like, all right, this is where it's at, and how good. I don't have to, thank God I'm not standing over a coffin, I'm looking at my friend who's smiling into the sunset and being like, yo, I had a great life. Like, I'm good.
Yeah.
So now what is it about? What? It's about the legacy he left behind. I'll protect that. But again, he's not making it about Bucky. He's not making it about Bucky. He's again making it about Steve. And of course, as you see the season, Sam goes, no, you got to look at you. You got to make it about you. Yeah. What do you want?
I think that scene in the penultimate episode between Bucky and Sam, sort of, shield training and discussing their mistakes, their future, all of that, was so powerful. And I'm curious, did you film that before the COVID break or after the COVID break? Do you remember?
That was before.
That was before.
And it was one of the episode 5 was like really the first one we were filming. I mean, the whole thing was like a movie. We never broke up the episodes, but that sequence at Sam's house was all at the very beginning of the show, and it was crazy because we were like shooting a really important scene very quickly, not having had, a lot of the journey yet.
Yeah. It's just interesting because that moment where, Bucky says Steve and I talked about giving the shield to you, but we didn't consider the ramifications of what that would mean for a Black man in America. And I was curious, if that's a scene you filmed before the last summer or after. And it was before.
That was literally probably day 3.
Yeah, it's wild.
And I think that one of the things that was so wild is obviously we were shooting the show and then, we were supposed to be the first show out and stuff. And then the pandemic happened, all the tragic events of the pandemic, everything, that was happening in this country, everything we were witnessing all the way up until this January, you know what I mean? And we were going, my God, like how relevant our show sort of suddenly even became even more, because there was a lot of questions that were being asked even before anything had happened.
Yeah. Obviously, Falcon and Winter Soldier is supposed to be the first show out from Marvel. This is Marvel under Feige at least figuring out how to make TV from the movies. And there's a lot that Feige has said about we're considering this sort of a 6-episode movie, that kind of thing. But I'm curious for you, as you are figuring out your character, who do you go to on set when you want to get answers to questions you have about Bucky? Are you going to Kari? Are you going to Malcolm? You go to Kevin directly?
Well, yeah, I mean, Kevin and I, I remember having a really good long chat with him before we started, just talking about Bucky and kind of like, making sure we were all on the same page and everything. And I loved that. I love talking to him. I mean, he's like an encyclopedia, I mean, there's just there's so much he knows about everything. So that was my main source. And then Kari and I spent a lot of time talking.
You mentioned getting into character sort of beforehand and referencing sort of what's going on your with yourself right now, your skin, your tattoos. I'm curious about the process of getting into shape for Bucky, to play Bucky, to like be in Marvel shape. Is that part of your process for reconnecting with Bucky after a time away from him?
Well, yeah. I mean, unless a role requires a certain kind of, whether it's like gaining weight or losing weight or whatever, I usually, I from my own, like the workout regimen has just always been part of my life, and really started with with this character in Marvel 10 years ago. I mean, just is when I really, I was trying so hard to get into such good shape around those movies that it just kind of, I mean, I don't go as crazy DEFCON 5 about it as I do when we are shooting something or when we were preparing. But yeah, going back to it, of course, I always try to go back, get into the gym and into the diet specifically like 3 months before. And it's a whole process. But I've gotten a little bit more comfortable now in my strengths versus my weak points. I think like in somewhere around the Civil War movie, I was like, I just want to be as massive as I can or something. Like I was just really, and now I'm kind of more, okay, I know what works for me a little bit better and not. But yeah, it's always, especially because of the stunt stuff. And, I like, it's a blessing really, because in a lot of ways, Bucky doesn't have any head covering anything. Since we started, I've managed to do a lot of stunt stuff. Whenever there's a physical sequence, like we always get passes at that, you know what I mean? And it really is on us, like how much we want to be involved or not. And I've always wanted to be as involved as possible. And it's been amazing. I mean, I think what happens is when you do it so many times, like I was so obsessed with it on the Civil War, I would even go up to the Russos and be like, even when the camera wasn't on me, I'd still want to do it. And they'd be like, dude, you don't understand. Like, and one time I like pulled my back because you can't, like, if you're doing that sequence like 30 times or whatever, like even like you're exhausted. I don't care maybe a super trained athlete, whatever, like they're training for that fight, right? They're training for that 2 hours, like for months, but we're going 8 hours a day. Like, I think, even some of the stuff, like I've always had a good amount of stuff that I was allowed to do. And that for me is super fun because he's much more hand-to-hand combat. He's got his arm, like he can't fly. He's not throwing hammers and spider webs and stuff. Like it's much more hand-to-hand. And it's because I want to be in shape to be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm just curious how that works over a pandemic hiatus. Zoe Kravitz told me that she was, she's training for Catwoman, and then she had to like keep training for Catwoman for an entire year, not knowing when she's going to go back,
So for the pandemic, I was running a lot. And then what I did was I had a pull-up bar in my apartment, and I was literally running up and down stairways. And then I was doing 100 to 200 push-ups a day, 100 pull-ups a day, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats. Like I would just do that over and over again. And yeah, that was the only way.
Right. Bucky's connection to Wakanda is something that I think is so interesting, that was kind of doubled down on in this show. You have that incredible fireside scene that you did, just insane amount of emotional work in just that scene, the deprogramming scene. Can you talk about filming that scene?
Oh God, that scene is like, those are the scenes that when you read a script, you're like, oh yes, this is gonna be amazing. Like you're like, oh, I love that. That's amazing. It's gonna be like the moment. And then it starts to be like this iceberg ahead in the distance that you're like slowly going closer to. And it's like, oh God, that scene. Oh God, that scene's coming up. And then you just have it marked on your calendar, like in 2 weeks is that, and it's just, and even up until that point, it's just always it's a scary thing to kind of always be thinking about, because, you have to go to these places and you have to go there. And yeah, we did it. We did it a few times, and it was a good day.
And then my last question is, because of Buggy's connection to Wakanda, I think a lot of people are hoping to see you maybe in future Wakandan stories. I know you don't know anything. I know they don't tell you anything. I know even if they did, you couldn't tell me anything. But is that something you would want to do? Is that something you would want to see Bucky explore?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, just like thinking about it now with like the whole Chadwick thing is just so crazy. I'm like, with him, I was always like really enamored, because I remember on that Civil War movie as we met, and he had come in and he was new, and it's sort of like, it was the introduction of his character, and I was like, oh my God, this guy he's gonna blow everyone away. You know what I mean? Like there was such like a commitment and dedication to everything he was doing. It was just so crazy. And we had a lot of these fight sequences, and I remember being terrified of going in those scenes with him. And we went for it. We really went for it. Cause I was like, okay, he's really showing up. Like I gotta stand tall. I gotta show up, and then afterwards we would just do these little fist bumps, like, cool, we're good, and then after we shot, I spent some time a little bit, like when we would see each other on these press tours, and we would be laughing, and it was really cool. And I just, in my head, I'd always hoped, that there was just going to be more. And so it's just crazy to even wrap my mind around the idea of being in any world without him there. I just can't even imagine it really in my mind, but obviously I always felt like I always, in my little scene, in my little scene at the end of Black Panther, I was always like, I'm part of the world, I'm part of that movie. I felt so good, with that little scene. And I just loved working with Ryan Coogler, on that. It was so cool, because he directed that scene, and I remember being there that day, and so I kind of got to work with him a little bit, and it was a really cool experience. Like I really, really liked him as a director, and I loved Fruitvale Station. I loved all of his movies.
Yeah.
I love Creed. I like so the idea of working with him again in some capacity is really cool, and you can bet I've definitely raised my hand and I said, hey man, whatever I can do, I'm in. But it's going to be wild to tackle, any of that going forward. I have no idea.
Well, I hope every future conversation you have with Kevin Feige ends with like, all right, see you in Wakanda. I'll be there. Tell me when to show up.
I just keep saying, yeah, I could just keep sending, I could, you know what? I should just send him an email once a week, just Wakanda.
Yeah.
Subject matter. But it's kind of cool, you know, like again, like I felt really like grateful and proud that I was included even with that little scene. Because sometimes like, you know, like I told this story before, but I don't know. I love telling it. You know, like I was on this airplane one time and I was flying home and I remember the stewardess came up to me and she just handed me this tiny piece of paper and like walked away. And I was like, what? So I was like, I don't know, maybe it was the number. I have no idea what, you know, and I open it and it just said Wakanda forever, you know, and then I like turn around to look down the aisle and she just goes, and I was like, oh my God, okay. Like, but it was, so I know, I love that people remember that Bucky's a part of that in some way. So, you know, hopefully maybe there'll be more.